Hi everyone, it's Sandy, and today I'm here to film my September wrap-up, so I'll be talking about all the books that I read in September. I only ended up reading 5 books this month, so we're going to just go ahead and jump right in. The first book that I finished is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This is a book that follows a witch and a witch hunter, and it takes place during 17th century France. So the witch in the story, whose name is Louise, she has actually given up her magic and has escaped her coven, and she's now living in the city that's patrolled by witch hunters, and the witch hunter in the story is named Reed. Due to some sort of incident that happens, Louise and Reed end up in this predicament where they have to marry one another. However, Reed does not know that Louise is a witch. So that's the main premise of the story, and I did really enjoy the concept of it, and I enjoyed reading from both of the characters' point of views. I really enjoyed seeing Lou defy the expectations of women during the time period that the story is set in. Lou is very sassy and fierce, and I like seeing her interactions with Reed. This is an enemies to lover type of romance, but I feel like the switch from enemies to lover occurred really quickly, and upon seeing Lou and Reed's feelings develop for each other, it did kind of throw me off guard by how fast it occurred. Because one second they hate each other, and then the next they want to kiss each other, and they're declaring their love for each other, and it's just like, what happened? What did I miss? So the romance in the story does feel a bit insta-lovey. And to be honest, this whole marriage thing between them just didn't make sense to me. Like, why do these characters have to marry each other in order to escape this incident that they have put themselves in? It really did not make sense to me. I could understand why Lou would go along with this marriage, but it didn't make sense to me why Reed would follow through with it. I do think the magic in this world is really cool. We have these different types of witches. I forgot the type of witch that Lou is, but there's blood witches as well that uses blood in order to do magic. Every time Lou does magic, there is a consequence to it, but I do have to say that the magic in this book can be a bit confusing. The author describes the magic using like threads and patterns, and that's just something I couldn't really visualize in my head. I just didn't quite understand how the magic worked. I wish the magic system was explained a little bit more clearly. By the time we got to the end of the story, this really big thing happened that involved magic, and I was just left really confused as to how that happened. I do really like the side characters in this book, such as Coco and Ansel. Coco is a woman of color, she's black, and she's best friends with Lou. I really enjoyed seeing how supportive and protective they were of one another. Their friendship was really heartwarming to read about. I am intrigued by Coco's abilities, so I do look forward to reading the sequel to find out more about that. So this morning, I actually watched Jesse's video from Bowties and Books about why they didn't like this book. I definitely agree with some of the points that they brought up, so I will link that video down below for y'all to check out. But some of the points that Jesse brought up includes the white feminism in the story, the lack of descriptors for people of color. All the characters of color in this book are described as having darker skin, but the author doesn't really describe any other physical traits of these characters other than their skin. The character's skin is just what the author focuses on, but when it comes to the white characters, there's a lot of other descriptors, and skin color is not mentioned at all. So it does make it seem like white is a default, and that we should just assume that characters are white unless described otherwise. There's also fat shaming in the story, and overall Jesse does a much better job describing everything that they didn't like about the story, and I do have to agree. So I will have their video linked below, and check it out if you want to learn more. I did film a reading vlog for this book, and originally I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but thinking more back on it, I think I'm going to change my rating to a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do feel like some scenes were dragged out, and this book is a lot longer than it probably should have been, but I did enjoy it, and I do want to read the sequel because I do want to know what happens next. And the next book that I finished is Frankly in Love by David Yoon. I also talked about this in my reading vlog. This is a story that follows Frank Lee, who is a Korean-American teenager. He's a senior in high school, and he has recently started dating this white girl named Britt. However, his parents are against him dating a non-Korean girl, so he's kind of keeping this relationship a secret, and in order to go on dates with Britt and simply hang out with her without his parents being suspicious, he strikes up this deal with a childhood friend named Joy, who's also Korean-American, and they pretend that they're dating each other in order to get their parents off their backs because Joy's also dating someone who isn't Korean, so they're in it together in this fake dating relationship. Before talking about my thoughts, I do want to give trigger warnings for racism, which is challenged by the main character. A shooting does occur in the book, panic attack, and the death of a parent. I love seeing a fake dating trope in books, but not when it comes to the expense of other characters. So in this book, Frank and Joy pretend that they're dating each other to their parents. However, they don't tell their significant other that this is occurring, and so that just gives a lot of red flags right there. Even though I do think Frank and Britt's relationship happened really quickly and I just didn't understand their attraction to one another, it's just not okay for Frank to be lying to Britt about his fake relationship with Joy. When it comes to something like that, where you're pretending you're dating another person, you have to tell your partner, otherwise you're just lying to them. And personally, to me, I just think that's not okay. Since this book does follow a Korean American main character, I did find myself relating to a lot of things that he experiences. I really appreciated seeing him challenging all of the racist remarks that his parents make, and I do like that the author discusses the racism within Asian communities. So it's not just Asian Americans hating on other people of color, but there's also hate between Koreans and Chinese and so on. And I do like that the author discusses that because that's not something that's really talked about. This story does explore complex family relationships. Frank's sister ended up marrying a black man and his parents aren't happy about it. They pretty much disown the older sister, and the older sister doesn't really have a relationship with her parents anymore. I did enjoy Frank and Joy's relationship. They have this very easygoing relationship. They've known each other for years. There's a lot that they could talk about and bond over, and I do really like all the conversations they had throughout the story. There's also a side character in the story that comes out at the very end of the book, and I felt like the author kind of used it as a plot twist, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that the author waited till the very end to reveal this information. The ending of this book definitely took a turn that I was not expecting. If you watched my reading vlog, you know that I literally bawled my eyes out while reading that ending. But what happened at the end really made me reflect on my own relationships with my parents. One of the things that I really related to Frank about was the fact that he wasn't fluent in Korean, and I'm not fluent in Vietnamese or Cantonese, and his parents aren't fluent in English, and my parents aren't fluent in English. And so there's this sort of language barrier that Frank experiences with his parents that I also experienced myself. And so the ending really put me in Frank's shoes, and it just really made me feel a lot of different emotions. I did have a hard time deciding what I wanted to rate this book. I didn't hate this book, I didn't love it either, but I do really appreciate its existence. So I feel like I'm going to give it a 3.5 stars, just like Serpent and Dove. But I would recommend this story, so if you haven't picked it up yet, definitely check it out, add it to your TBR. The next book that I finished is With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I actually listened to this as an audiobook because the author does narrate the story, and she does a phenomenal job doing so. This book follows our main character Imani Santiago, and she is a high school senior, but she's also a teen mom. Imani has a passion for cooking, and so she signs up for this culinary arts class that her high school offers, and as part of the class she has the opportunity to travel to Spain during spring break. However, there's a lot of challenges that she faces that interferes with her ability to go to Spain. So this story follows her journey throughout her senior year of high school, trying to apply for colleges and figure out what she wants to do with her life, along with exploring her passion for cooking. I really love this book. I thought it was so well written. The author's voice was just fantastic. I love the way she narrates her story. Obviously she wrote it, but it just sounds so beautiful in my ears. And I love that even though Imani was a teen mom, the story didn't really focus on that. Yes, her daughter is a huge part of her life and is someone that she has to care for. The story's focus was really on Imani's self-discovery and her passion for cooking. Something I really wish my high school offered was a culinary arts class, because I would have signed up in a heartbeat. So I loved all of the scenes where Imani was in class cooking up a dish. It was just so fun to read about, and seeing all of the dishes that Imani makes made me so hungry, and I wanted to try everything she makes. The way the author describes all of the dishes has me salivating. It sounded so good. There's not a lot of things that I disliked about the story. I do have to say that the main character's ex-boyfriend, aka the father of her child, seemed very controlling and sometimes possessive as well. So I definitely wanted to bring that up. She does have a love interest in the story. I really loved him. I loved seeing them together. I thought they were really cute. Overall, I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I picked up is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This story follows Lucy and Josh. They are both the assistant to the CEO at the company that they worked for, but then both of these companies merged. They both maintained the role that they have, but now they're working together. They both hate each other for whatever reason, but now the company they're working for is hiring for this new position. It's essentially a promotion that would make the person hired become the boss of the other person. So obviously both of these characters want this position, so they're competing against one another to earn it. So I was really looking forward to reading this, but unfortunately I ended up being pretty disappointed. I love reading about hate to love romances, but the relationship between Josh and Lucy progressed pretty quickly and it felt rushed, which made me not like the romance as much. I honestly found myself bored reading the story. The characters didn't seem interesting or special to me. They kind of felt immature to me because they were constantly playing these games with one another, and it was just like, why? And their hatred for each other just wasn't completely clear to me. I wish that was more fleshed out at the beginning of the story so that we kind of have a better understanding of why they hate each other, and then seeing that relationship progress. The author constantly tells us that Lucy hates Josh, but she doesn't really show us why. I also didn't like that the author uses descriptions of having a disability or other physical trait and associating with ugliness and being unlikable. Unfortunately, this just wasn't a story that I found myself engaged with. I just picked it up hoping that I'd like it, but then the further I got into the story, I realized that I was just reading it to get through it and that I wasn't enjoying it. So I did rate this book a 2 out of 5 stars. And the very last book that I finished is Again But Better by Christine Riccio, and I listened to this as an audiobook. I obviously wanted to pick this book up because I have been following Christine for years. She's the reason that I discovered BookTube, and honestly this story sounded like something that I would enjoy. This story follows our main character Shane, who's in college, and she's been on the pre-med track studying biology, I believe. However, pre-med just isn't her passion, so she ends up studying abroad in London for a semester, where she tells her parents that she's doing some sort of pre-med thing, but instead she's actually part of the writing program. So as for trigger warnings in the story, there is cheating that happens, there is a family fallout, and there is a scene where a character gets robbed. I love the studying abroad aspect of the story, and I love that the main character was in college. This is a new adult book because the main character is in her 20s, she's in college, but I feel like it's marketed as YA. I don't know, is that just me? But I really loved reading about a character who was in college and who was studying abroad. I just recently graduated from college. I did study abroad during my junior year, so it was so cool to read about Shane's experiences. I've never been to London before, let alone anywhere in Europe, so I love seeing all of the places that Shane got to visit, and it definitely did make me want to hop on a plane and head to somewhere in Europe. I did listen to the audiobook, and I do have to say that I really enjoyed the narrator. I love all the different voices that she had for all of the characters. I never really got confused as to who was speaking. I just love it in general when narrators have very clear and distinct voices for all the characters in the story, and that's what the narrator in this story did. I was very surprised by this magical element that occurred in the story, but I do have to say that I loved it. As soon as it happened and I thought about the title, everything just clicked for me. Because of what happened, I feel like it makes the story stand out a little bit more, and I love the overall role that it had in the character development. I did really like Shane's character. Like I mentioned earlier, I love that she was in college and that she was just trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life, and I really wish that there were more stories following characters in college because I feel like that's something I really desperately wanted while I was in college. So Shane's relatable, she's funny. One of the things that immediately comes up in mind when I think of Shane is her clumsiness, and I feel like that was just emphasized way too often throughout the novel. Like, we get it, you're clumsy, you fall a lot, but we don't need to hear about it every single time that it happens. But ultimately, the main thing I didn't like about the story was the fact that Shane had a crush on someone who was already in a relationship with someone else. And I do get it, things like that do happen in real life. When we found out that the love interest pilot was in a relationship with someone, it just made me not really like his character. There's just something about Pilot that I didn't like, and it wasn't just the fact that he didn't tell Shane that he was in a relationship with someone, but there's other instances throughout the story where his interactions with her just had me feeling some sort of way, and it wasn't a positive thing. There's something about Pilot that I don't like, but I can't really put a finger on it, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. Overall, I would rate this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books that I read in September. If you've read any of them, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!